Joining me now is the Rome correspondent for the National Catholic Register and author of the book, The Next Pope, The Leading Cardinal Candidates. Please welcome back to the program, Edward Pentin, who joins us from Rome. Ed, what do we know of these allegations against Beishu and 6 other people who are to stand trial?
Well, the Vatican hasn't actually released any information about the allegations, but we're led to believe that it's largely to do with the London deal, the now infamous London deal that went sour, which accrued a large amount of losses for the Vatican. There's also money connected with money that he gave to Caritas in Sardinia related to his brother. There's another aspect to this regarding going back a bit. He wanted to invest hundreds of millions of euros from the Secretary of State into some Angolan project. Cardinal Becciu was a previous nuncio there. But the key one is this London property deal, which I think is really at the heart of this, although nothing, as I say, has been officially announced yet about the charges against him.
What would this trial mean for Becciu now that he's no longer a cardinal? What does that open him up to as far as prosecution is concerned?
Well, it opens him up to both a Vatican trial and possibly a civil trial too. It really opens him up for prosecution in both ways. If he was still a cardinal and he had all the rights of a cardinal, I mean, he is still technically a cardinal, but if he had all the rights, only a pope can judge a cardinal. But by removing those rights, it means he's open to prosecution from civil authorities as well as the Vatican and canonical ones as well.
A joint investigation between Italy and the Vatican provided evidence that Becciu directed Vatican and Italian church funds to that charity controlled by his brother, which you mentioned. What do we know about that group? And was money actually transferred?
Well, we don't know much at all, really, but that's another shady deal. What we do know more about is this London property deal, and I've been looking into it more past week or so, and that is a deal that he oversaw, and it led to what I was told by somebody who studied it in great detail for the last couple of years, to mind-blowing losses for the Vatican, going into possibly potentially hundreds of millions of euros. Now, in order to try to stave off those losses, they ended up actually making things worse by bringing in another broker who charged them a fortune as well, and also sort of made the situation worse and ended up with even more losses. So it became an enormous scandal, an enormous problem, and Cardinal Becciu was overseeing almost all of that up until his promotion out in 2018. Sorry.
Just so our viewers understand, the Vatican paid 350 million euros for that London property. It was worth about 180 million. And some of the money was borrowed, so the losses might be even greater, as Ed was just talking about. Ed, what else do we know about this? The overpaying? Now, the Vatican, I mean, they released their budget for the first time, the complete budget. And I read an interview with a financial officer at the Vatican that said losses are part of the process, that profits are not part of our mission. What do you make of that? And does that encourage people to give to St. Peter's Pence this weekend?
Yes, I mean, I saw that too. It's a rather strange thing to say because, of course, we were sort of taught to believe not to go into debt. They're saying that it's okay to go into some debt as long as it's not as long as it's manageable. But yes, this has been a concern quite a bit lately because before, I think 2018, the Holy See or the Curia rather, was 70 million euros in debt. They managed to get that down to 11 million, and now, of course, with the coronavirus, it's going to be much higher. But there are wider concerns about Peter's Pence, as you alluded to, and that's something I'm looking into now. There does seem to be problems there, although the head of the Secretariat, who you quoted earlier, said that the Peter's Pence was not actually used to fund these property deals in London. It does seem as though some of the money did go to these deals, not to cover it, but to contribute to it. And I think to contribute to paying off some of the loans that they took out to buy these properties. And
Unbelievable.
that is, I believe, they've tried to liquidate some of the assets of Peter's Pence in order to pay for that. But as I say, I'm looking into this, and I hope to get some confirmation next week.
That's amazing. Cardinal George Pell, the former Vatican treasurer, arrived back in Rome this week. It's been reported that his return to Rome is unrelated to the current financial scandal at the Vatican. Now, you've reported that Cardinal Pell is expected to stay in Rome for some months and possibly be called upon unofficially to help with some aspects of financial reform. What might Pell be asked to do, Ed?
Well, I think there's possibilities that he's going to be a sort of unofficial consultant to the Pope and to the Vatican, those involved in Vatican finances. I don't know if it's going to be sort of a long-term thing, but I'm told that it could be 6 months or more that he'll be here, and that the Pope wants to give him, quote, bits and pieces to do while he's here. And that could involve, as I say, something to do with finance, but also he's still a member of certain dicasteries, including, I think, the Congregation for Bishops. So he may return to doing some work with them as well. And I think he's staying back in where he was living before. And so I think much is continuing as it was before he left, of course, without the job of being prefect to the Secretariat for the Economy.
Well, it's certainly a vindication for Cardinal Pell after all he's been through in Australia and finally vindicated by the courts. But now, returning to Rome, I'm sure, is a personal vindication for him and an important sign for his confreres and for the world to see. Now, the day before the U.S. Embassy to the Holy See's symposium on advancing and defending international religious freedom through diplomacy, that was the name of the conference, the Vatican defended its deal with China, Ed. Vatican editorial director Andrea Tornielli wrote, "The provisional agreement exclusively treats the process for the appointment of bishops, an essential question for the life of the Church and for the necessary communion between the pastors of the Chinese Catholic Church with the Bishop of Rome and with the bishops throughout the world. The goal of the provisional agreement, therefore, has never been merely diplomatic, much less political, but was always genuinely pastoral. Its objective is to permit the Catholic faithful to have bishops in full communion with the successor of Rome, or successor of Peter, who are at the same time recognized by the authorities of the People's Republic of China." Ed, your thoughts on that justification for this deal, saying, well, this is just pastoral, just so everybody can be in the same club.
Yes, that is certainly how the Vatican seems to see it. They see it as primarily, ultimately, to improve evangelization in China. But as Cardinal Parolin has said yesterday, and he said many times, this is a step-by-step process. It's going to take a long time, and patience is needed. But yes, this is how they see it. And I think part of the big problem here is because a lot of dioceses, a lot of parishes are without priests and bishops, and so they feel there's a great need to fill those urgently with bishops and priests who are faithful to Rome, who are in communion rather with Rome. So that's the underlying purpose of this agreement.
But there's the problem, Ed. I mean, you mentioned it. They'd like to see bishops faithful to Rome. The fact is, as Cardinal Zen has said repeatedly, as people in China that I've spoken to, priests and dissidents have said, the Vatican is allowing China to choose these bishops. They may not be faithful to Rome. Certainly this newfangled gospel with Xi and Mao sprinkled in the midst of the scripture, that's not being faithful to anything, much less God. So I want to move on to this and reflect on all of that. During the symposium that we talked about earlier, Secretary of State Mike Pompeo urged the Vatican to join the U.S. in denouncing China for violations of religious freedom. Listen.
Nowhere, however, nowhere is religious freedom under assault more than it is inside of China today. That's because, as with all communist regimes, the Chinese Communist Party deems itself the ultimate moral authority. An increasingly repressive CCP, frightened by its own lack of democratic legitimacy, works day and night to snuff out the lamp of freedom, especially religious freedom, on a horrifying scale.
What has been the reaction in Rome to Secretary Pompeo's opinion of this Vatican-China deal and his advocacy here?
Well, I think they obviously agree that he's quite right to hold those views if those are the views of the Trump administration. What they are concerned about, what they didn't like, was that he wrote this op-ed in First Things, which directly criticized the Vatican, or rather warned them not to renew this provisional agreement. And they felt that was an unnecessary and unwelcome interference in Vatican affairs, and something that's not done normally in diplomatic circles, and especially before a high-level meeting as happened today between Mike Pompeo, Secretary Pompeo, and Cardinal Parolin and Archbishop Gallagher. So that this is the concern, that there's a certain perhaps crossing of boundaries, which is normally something that they don't do, especially before a meeting, as I say.
Yeah, I have to tell you, for someone who's been covering this for 25 years, to watch what's happened in China and what this deal hath wrought in the lives of Chinese clergy and the underground church, who are the loyal followers of Rome, it's a heartbreaker. And then you've got the Uyghur Muslims put in these internment camps, the routine expelling and arrests of bishops and priests. I just don't see how this makes pastoral or political sense, it seems to me. But I'm opining here, forgive me. At the same event, Holy See Secretary for Relations with States, Archbishop Paul Gallagher, who you mentioned a moment ago, he said this, listen.
It should come as no surprise that the protection and promotion of religious liberty is one of the main political priorities of the Holy See. In its bilateral relations, the question of protecting religious freedom so as to allow the local Catholic Church to exercise its mission remains an indispensable part of the scope and activity of the Holy See.
As we mentioned earlier, Ed, the situation over the past 2 years has gotten worse for the Catholic Church in China. What is the Vatican hoping to gain through this deal? And what do you make of the Pope's refusal to meet both with Mike Pompeo, which I understand, he's worried about the politics there in an election year, but also refusing to meet with Cardinal Joseph Zen of Hong Kong?
Yes, but as I was saying earlier, I mean, this is the way they see this agreement. They see it as very much a long-term thing, and that ultimately it will all work to the good. But of course, this is very much the sort of Vatican Ostpolitik that was tried back in the 60s and 70s, which was seen to fail, and of course, which John Paul II and Benedict criticized, because they said you can't compromise with a communist regime like there is in China, for example. And this is what the Vatican seems to be doing. But the issue of the Pope not seeing Secretary Pompeo, I think, is quite significant in the sense that it shows just how sensitive the Vatican is to criticism of this agreement and criticism of its position. I think it was quite strongly related with the sort of the run-up to this meeting. As I say, I think they didn't like this article that was written beforehand, and I think they felt it wasn't just about meddling in the election. It was put to Archbishop Gallagher exploiting the Vatican for electoral purposes. I think it was probably more to do with this sensitivity over this agreement. That seems to be quite clear, at least from what the people I've spoken to here, that it's that they really don't want, as I said earlier, any kind of interference in this. They want to let it go and just take the long-term view and see how it works out. But I think a lot of people here too, I don't know if there's a lot, but I think some were grateful about how straightforward and frank Secretary Pompeo was about this, and the need to speak up in the face of these injustices, not just for Catholics there, but also all religions, and particularly the Uyghurs, who are, of course, being seriously subjected to human rights violations in a part of China.
Well, I also think the refusal to meet with Cardinal Joseph Zen of Hong Kong is a critical mistake here. And I understand, I think it's part of the same thinking, that to do so would telegraph to the world that we are somehow listening to those who criticize or are watchful of what China is doing to the people in mainland China. But I have to tell you on a personal note, Ed, I've been subjected to a lot of this for daring. Again, I've been reporting this for 25 years. I haven't changed. People's view of human rights and religious abuses have changed. In John Paul II's reign, in Benedict's reign, this was an outrage and a deal breaker. You just didn't deal with these regimes. Now we have a different thinking, but don't kill the messenger here, who are reporting on the abuses and the deaths, the heinous, grievous sins enacted against faithful people for doing nothing but enacting their faith. And that's what we're trying to report on here and will continue to do. Ed Pentin, thank you for being here. The book, The Next Pope, The Leading Cardinal Candidates by Edward Pentin, is available at bookstores everywhere, online, and at EWTN's religious catalog, EWTNRC.com. And you can follow Ed on Twitter at Edward Pentin. Thank you, Ed.
Thank you, Raymond.